Every species in the galaxy had a story about how they joined the Galactic Council. The Valorians talked about their elegant first contact, arriving in ships made of living crystal that sang songs across radio frequencies. The Travathi boasted about how they solved the Council's oldest mathematical riddle as their introduction. The Kethari presented genetic blueprints so advanced that the Council offered them a seat before they even asked. Every species had something beautiful, something impressive, something worthy to show the galaxy when they first stepped onto that ancient stage. And then there were the humans. The humans did not arrive with songs or riddles or gifts. They arrived with blood still drying on their knuckles, with warships held together by duct tape and fury, with soldiers who had not slept in 6 days and did not care. They arrived at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible way, and they changed everything. This is that story. And if you think you know how it ends, you are wrong. Because nobody, not even the humans themselves, expected what came next. The Galactic Council chamber on the station called Aethonis Prime had stood for 11,000 years. It was a massive structure, a dome carved from a single asteroid and lined with metals that did not exist on most periodic tables. The chamber itself could hold representatives from over 400 species. Seats rose in circular tiers like a stadium built for gods. Holographic translators floated in the air like fireflies, converting every language into every other language in real time. The floor was made of something called mirror stone, a material so perfectly reflective that delegates could see themselves staring back from below, a constant reminder, the architects had said, that every decision reflects back upon the one who makes it. For 11,000 years, the Council had maintained order. Not perfect peace. That was impossible when you gathered 400 species with 400 different ideas about territory, resources, religion, and reproduction. But order, a system, rules that everyone followed because the alternative was chaos, and chaos meant extinction. The current session had been called to address a crisis that had been building for 3 years. The Zarathi Dominion, a collective of insectoid species from the Outer Rim, had been expanding aggressively. They consumed worlds. Not conquered, consumed. Their biology required them to strip planets of all organic material to feed their breeding cycles. A single Zarathi queen could produce 10 million offspring in one standard year, and each of those offspring needed biomass equal to roughly one large Earth mammal to reach maturity. For centuries, the Zarathi had kept to uninhabited worlds, barren planets rich in primitive organic material, fungal worlds, swamp planets. Places nobody else wanted. But 3 years ago, something changed. Their queens began producing at double the normal rate. Nobody knew why. Some scientists theorized it was an evolutionary response to a pathogen. Others believed it was intentional, a genetic trigger pulled by the Dominion's ruling caste to begin a new phase of expansion. Whatever the reason, the result was devastating. The Zarathi had consumed 14 inhabited worlds in 3 years. Not major council worlds, small colonies, outposts, research stations, but each one had held living beings, people with families and futures, and each one had been reduced to a bare rock floating in space, stripped of every leaf, every microbe, every drop of water that held organic compounds. The council had responded with diplomacy, strongly worded resolutions. Trade sanctions, formal condemnations read aloud in the chamber while the Zarathi ambassador sat in its specially designed seat and clicked its mandibles in what the translators interpreted as polite acknowledgement. Nothing worked. Ambassador Valori Din of the Valorian Confederacy stood at the central podium. She was tall and thin, with silver skin that shifted colors depending on her emotional state. Right now, it was a deep, worried blue. "Honored delegates," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber with the help of acoustic amplifiers embedded in the walls. "We have received confirmation that the Zarathi Dominion has entered the Talvine system. Talvine 3 is home to 6 million Kethari citizens. The Dominion fleet numbers approximately 2,000 vessels. At current speed, they will reach orbital range within 40 standard hours." The chamber erupted. Most species present did not shout, but in their own versions of alarm. The Dravathi hummed at frequencies that made the air vibrate. The Motheki changed colors rapidly, flashing warnings in their bioluminescent skin language. The Kethari delegation simply went still, their 4 eyes wide, their hands gripping the arms of their seats. High Chancellor Sothran Mars, a Dravathi whose species had held the chancellorship for the last 200 years, raised one of his forearms for silence. He was old, even by Dravathi standards. His exoskeleton had turned from black to grey, and the bioluminescent nodes along his spine flickered unevenly, a sign of age and fatigue. "Order!" he said. His voice was deep, resonant, the kind of voice that made walls hum. "We will have order." The chamber quieted, though the tension remained, thick as smoke. "Ambassador Valori," the Chancellor continued. "What is the military assessment?" Valori Din's skin shifted to a pale, sickly green. "The combined defense fleet currently stationed near the Talveen system consists of 80 vessels, mostly patrol craft and light frigates. They are not equipped to engage a force of 2,000. And our reserve fleets? The nearest significant naval force is the Valorian Third Fleet, currently stationed at Orium Anchorage. It numbers 160 vessels. Transit time to Talveen at maximum speed is approximately 120 standard hours. That is 3 times too slow," said Ambassador Kithari Liss, the senior Kithari delegate. Her voice was calm, but her secondary arms were trembling. "My people will be dead before your ships arrive." Silence fell across the chamber, the kind of silence that has weight, the kind that presses down on shoulders and makes breathing harder. Chancellor Mars looked around the chamber. 400 species, thousands of delegates, millions of warships spread across the galaxy, and none of them close enough, fast enough, or willing enough to save 6 million people. "Is there no force closer?" he asked. The military advisors consulted their displays. Holographic star maps bloomed in the air above the chamber floor, showing fleet positions, transit corridors, supply lines. Red markers indicated Zerathi positions. Blue markers showed Council forces. The gap between them around Talveen was enormous. "There is nothing," said Fleet Admiral Voran, a Morathiki whose entire body was covered in tactical data projections that his species could read through their skin. "Every major fleet is committed to defensive positions around core worlds. After the fall of the Prillian colonies, the Council voted to prioritize protection of major population centers. Talveen is classified as a secondary system." "Secondary," Ambassador Liss repeated. The word hung in the air like poison. "There may be one option," said a quiet voice from the far side of the chamber. Heads turned. Eyes, optical sensors, heat-sensing pits, and echolocation arrays all focused on the speaker. It was Ambassador Dreno Vass of the Ilthari Compact, a small, nervous-looking being with too many joints in his fingers and eyes that never seemed to blink at the same time. 3 cycles ago, Dreno Vass said, "Our deep space monitoring stations detected an unregistered fleet transiting through the Crevan corridor. The fleet was not broadcasting any known identification signals. We initially classified them as pirates or scavengers, but the energy signatures were unusual. Very unusual." "Define unusual," said the Chancellor. "Their ships were using fusion drives." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Fusion drives. Primitive technology by Council standards. Most civilizations abandoned fusion propulsion within a few centuries of discovering faster-than-light travel. Using fusion drives in deep space was like using a wooden cart on a highway. We tracked them for several days before they noticed our probes and destroyed them. Before we lost contact, we managed to gather some data. The fleet consisted of approximately 150 vessels, small by our standards but heavily armed for their technology level. Their hull composition was primarily iron and titanium alloys. Basic, rugged, and they were transmitting communications in a language our databases could not identify. "An unknown species," said Valori Din, her skin flickering with surprise.
"Unknown to the Council, yes."
But not, it turns out, unknown to the galaxy. After the incident, we searched our historical archives and found a single reference. A Valorian deep space probe had detected radio signals from an uncontacted world approximately 900 years ago. The signals were primitive, broadcasting entertainment programs, scientific data, and notably, a significant amount of military communication. The world was flagged as pre-contact and placed on the observation list. It was a small planet, third from its star. The inhabitants called it Earth. The chamber went quiet again. The word meant nothing to most delegates, just another uncontacted world among millions. The observation file was never updated, Dreno Vass continued. The Valorian probe was reassigned, and the world was forgotten. It appears that in the 900 years since that initial detection, the inhabitants of Earth developed faster-than-light travel on their own, without Council assistance, without guidance. without anyone teaching them the standard methods,
That is extremely unusual.
said Chancellor Mars. Most species require at least basic contact with a spacefaring civilization to make the conceptual leaps necessary for FTL development. These beings, they call themselves humans, apparently did not require such contact. They developed FTL travel using a method our physicists have reviewed and described as, and I quote, theoretically insane but functionally effective. A few delegates made sounds that could be interpreted as nervous laughter. What does this have to do with the Talveen crisis? Asked Ambassador Liss impatiently. The human fleet was last tracked moving in the general direction of the Talveen system. Our analysts believe they may have detected the Zarathi fleet's approach and are moving to investigate. If they arrive before the Dominion reaches Talveen 3, there could be a confrontation. 150 ships against 2,000, said Fleet Admiral Voran dismissively. With fusion drives and iron hulls, they will be destroyed in minutes. Perhaps, said Drano Vass. But I thought the Council should be aware. Chancellor Mars nodded slowly. Noted. But we cannot pin the hopes of 6 million Quathari on an unknown species flying primitive ships into a battle they cannot win. We must find another solution. But there was no other solution. The debate continued for hours. Proposals were made and rejected. Fleets were too far away. Diplomatic channels with the Zarathi had been exhausted. The Kethari ambassador eventually stopped speaking altogether, sitting in her seat with all four eyes closed, her secondary arms wrapped around herself. 40 hours passed. The council remained in session, arguing, debating, accomplishing nothing. Holographic displays showed the Zarathi fleet getting closer and closer to Talveen 3. 2,000 ships. 10 billion individual Zarathi warriors. A force designed not for battle but for consumption. Their ships were not elegant. They were biological, grown rather than built. Massive organic vessels that looked like tumors floating in space. Each one carried millions of Zarathi drones, mindless eating machines that would descend on a planet like locusts and strip it to bedrock in days. The Kethari on Talveen 3 knew what was coming. Evacuation was impossible. They did not have enough ships. They had begun sending farewell messages to family members on other worlds. The Council intercepted some of these messages. They were heartbreaking. Parents telling children they loved them. Scientists transmitting their life's work in compressed data bursts, hoping someone would continue it. Artists sending images of their final creations. The Council listened to these messages and did nothing, because there was nothing to do. And then, at hour 37, something happened. A communications officer on Athonus Prime, a young Valorian named Thessa, noticed something strange on her monitoring display. A burst of signals from the Talveen system. Not Kethari signals, not Zarathi signals. Something else entirely. The signals were crude by Council standards, using frequency modulations that had been obsolete for thousands of years. But they were clear. Thessa ran the signals through her translation matrix. It took several minutes because the language was not in the database. She had to use adaptive algorithms, the kind designed for first contact scenarios. When the translation finally came through, she read it 3 times to make sure she was not making a mistake. Then she ran from her station to the Council chamber. She burst through the doors, violating about 15 protocols regarding chamber access during active sessions. Security moved to intercept her, but she was already shouting, "Chancellor! Chancellor Mars! I have a transmission from the Talveen system." The chamber fell silent. Every delegate turned to look at the young officer standing in the doorway, her silver skin flushed with excitement and fear. "Speak," said the Chancellor. Tessa held up her datapad and read the translation aloud. "Attention, Zaratha Fleet. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Federation battleship Ardent Fury. You are approaching a populated world with hostile intent. You have 60 seconds to reverse course. If you do not comply, we will open fire. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. You have been warned." The chamber erupted. "One ship?" said Fleet Admiral Voran. "One ship against 2,000? "Not one ship," said Thessa, scrolling through her data. "The transmission came from the lead vessel, but our sensors are now detecting the full fleet. 147 ships. They dropped out of FTL travel approximately 40 minutes ago and positioned themselves directly between the Zarathi fleet and Talveen 3. 147 ships with fusion drives and iron hulls," Voran repeated. against 2,000 Zarathi bioships. This is suicide. These humans are going to die. Perhaps we should watch before we judge, said Dreno Vaz quietly. The Chancellor ordered the main display activated. A massive holographic projection filled the center of the chamber, showing a real-time sensor feed from the Talvine system. The image quality was not perfect at this distance, but it was clear enough. The Zarathi fleet was enormous, a dark cloud of organic ships stretching across thousands of kilometers of space. And in front of them, tiny by comparison, was a line of ships that looked like they had been built in a shipyard that had never heard of elegance. Blocky, angular, covered in what appeared to be armor plating bolted directly onto the hull. Gun turrets bristled from every surface. These ships had not been designed to explore or to trade or to make first contact. These ships had been designed for one purpose: war. 60 seconds passed. The Zarathi did not change course. Perhaps they did not understand the transmission. Perhaps they did not care. Perhaps they looked at the small fleet in front of them and felt nothing but contempt for these primitive creatures standing in their way. Captain Elena Vasquez's voice came through the chamber speakers one more time. It was calm, steady, the voice of someone who had made a decision and was at peace with it. 60 seconds expired. Oh, ships. Weapons free. Give them hell. And 147 human warships opened fire on 2,000 Zarathi bioships. The Galactic Council watched in silence. Nobody breathed, and the universe changed. The first volley from the human fleet was not elegant. There were no graceful energy beams slicing through space like the Valorian lancecutters. There were no guided plasma streams like the Dravathi preferred. There were no gravitational distortion weapons or quantum disruption fields or any of the sophisticated tools of destruction that the Council's military forces had developed over millennia of warfare. What there was metal. Thousands of projectiles, each one a solid tungsten rod accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light by electromagnetic rail systems that ran the entire length of the human ships. The rounds left the barrels glowing white-hot, trailing streaks of superheated gas, and crossed the distance between the two fleets in seconds. The first Zarathi bioship took 17 hits simultaneously. Each tungsten rod punched through the organic hull like a needle through wet paper. The ship did not explode in the traditional sense. It ruptured. Biological fluid sprayed into vacuum and froze instantly, creating clouds of crystallized gore that glittered in the starlight. The ship's internal atmosphere vented through the exit wounds, and the pressure differential tore the vessel apart from the inside. In the council chamber, 400 species watched a primitive kinetic weapon do in 3 seconds what their most advanced energy weapons would have taken 30 seconds to accomplish. Kinetic accelerators, whispered Fleet Admiral Voron. His bioluminescent skin had gone pale. They are using kinetic accelerators, magnetic rail systems. That technology is 6,000 years obsolete.
It appears to be working quite well for something obsolete,
said Dreno Vaz. The human fleet fired again, and again, and again. The railguns had a cycle rate that the Council's military analysts would later describe as psychologically distressing. Every 4 seconds, each ship launched another salvo. 147 ships, each carrying between 8 and 20 railgun batteries depending on vessel size, firing every 4 seconds. In the first minute of engagement, the human fleet launched approximately 30,000 tungsten projectiles into the Zarathi formation. The Zarathi bioships were not fragile. Their organic hulls were dense, layered with chitin plates that could absorb significant energy weapon impacts. The Council's standard plasma cannons could take up to a minute of sustained fire to breach a Zarathi hull. But these weapons were not energy-based. They were physical, mass moving at incredible velocity. And the organic armor that shrugged off plasma was about as effective against hypersonic tungsten as a soap bubble against a bullet. In the first 5 minutes, the human fleet destroyed 89 Zarathi vessels. The council chamber was silent except for the sound of translators working overtime, and the soft gasps and clicks and hums of 400 species processing what they were seeing.
"This is not possible,"
said a Mortheki military advisor, her skin patterns displaying complex equations that showed why the numbers should not work.
"Their ships are smaller.
Their technology is inferior. Their fleet is outnumbered more than 13 to 1. This should not be happening." But it was happening. And it was happening because the humans understood something about warfare that the Council had forgotten thousands of years ago. something that the Council's advanced civilizations had evolved past, had deemed primitive, and abandoned in favor of more elegant solutions. The humans understood violence, not as a tool, not as a last resort, not as an unfortunate necessity. They understood it the way a river understands flowing downhill. It was in their bones, in their blood, in every cell of their angry, stubborn, unreasonable bodies. They had been fighting each other for their entire evolutionary history. They had perfected the art of killing long before they perfected the art of agriculture. And when they finally crawled off their angry little planet and into the stars, they brought that expertise with them. The Zarathi responded. Of course, they were not mindless, despite what some council species believed. The Dominion's commanding intelligence, a strategic queen designated Empress Vral, reorganized her fleet with impressive speed. The bioships shifted formation, spreading out to dilute the effectiveness of the human volleys. Zaratha acid launchers returned fire, spitting streams of corrosive biological compound that could eat through most known hull materials in seconds. The acid hit the human ships. It splashed across iron and titanium hulls and began to eat. On a council vessel, this would have been catastrophic. Council ships were built with advanced composites, lightweight and strong but vulnerable to chemical attack. The acid would have breached a Valorian hull in moments. But the human hulls were thick, centimeters of crude, heavy metal plating. The acid ate into the surface and sizzled and smoked, but it took time. Time the humans used to keep firing. And when sections of hull became compromised, the crew inside did something that the Council's automated damage control systems would never have considered. They welded more metal on top. Repair crews in vacuum suits, operating in the middle of an active battle, went outside their ships and welded additional armor plates over the damaged sections. The Council's military observers watched this with something approaching disbelief. The concept of sending living beings outside a ship during combat was considered suicidal by every military doctrine in the known galaxy. The humans did it anyway. Some of them died. Acid splashes caught 2 repair crews on the destroyer Hammerfall, dissolving their suits and the people inside them in seconds. The ship's captain, a man named Torres, reported the losses in a voice that was tight with fury but did not break. He ordered replacement crews to continue repairs. They went. The battle raged for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of continuous fire, continuous maneuvering, continuous death. The Zarathi lost 312 ships. The humans lost 19. But the numbers were still overwhelming. 128 human ships against 1,688 Zarathi vessels. The humans were inflicting disproportionate casualties, but they could not keep it up forever. Their ammunition was finite. Their crews were exhausted. Their ships were battered, scarred with acid burns and pockmarked with impacts from Zaretha spine launchers. Captain Vasquez knew the math. She had always known the math. She had looked at the numbers before she gave the order to engage, and she had made her decision anyway. Because between her fleet and the Zarathi were 6 million Quithari civilians, people she had never met, a species she had only learned about 3 days ago. And Captain Elena Vasquez was not the kind of person who could look at 6 million innocent lives and say that the numbers did not work. She opened a channel to her fleet. All ships, this is Vasquez. Status report. The reports came in. Ammunition at 40% across the fleet. Hull integrity ranging from acceptable to deeply concerning. 14 ships reporting significant structural damage. 3 ships had lost main engine power and were fighting on maneuvering thrusters alone, sitting nearly still in space while Zarathi vessels circled them like predators. "We can hold for another 20 minutes, said Commander Chen from the heavy cruiser Iron Mountain. "Maybe 30 if we reduce fire rate. After that, we are out of ammunition, and it becomes a ramming discussion." "Understood," said Vasquez. She looked at the tactical display. The Zarathi were adapting, learning the range and cycle rate of the railguns, timing their movements to the gaps between volleys. They were getting smarter. In 20 minutes, they would overwhelm the human line through sheer numbers, and then there would be nothing between them and Talveen 3. She switched to a different channel, one that was not broadcasting to the fleet, one that was aimed at a specific set of coordinates in deep space, far behind the battle line. Hammer actual to anvil actual. Execute phase 2. In the council chamber, the translators picked up this transmission. Most delegates did not understand its significance. Ambassador Dreno Vaz leaned forward in his seat, his too many jointed fingers tapping nervously on his armrest. "What is phase 2? Asked Chancellor Mars. Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. For 3 minutes, nothing happened. The battle continued. The humans kept fighting, their rate of fire slowing as ammunition dwindled. 2 more human ships were destroyed, torn apart by concentrated acid streams from multiple Zarathi vessels. The crews did not eject. The humans, it seemed, did not believe in escape pods. Their ships were built to fight until they could not fight anymore, and their crews stayed with them until the end. Then, at the edge of the sensor display, something appeared. It started as a distortion, a ripple in space-time that the Council's sensors interpreted as a gravitational anomaly. Then the ripple became a tear, and the tear became a hole, and through the hole came ships. Not 147 ships, not 300 ships, not 500 ships. The sensor officer on Athonus Prime, the same young Valorian named Tessa who had first detected the human transmissions, watched her display with her mouth open and her skin cycling through colors she did not even know she could produce. "Chancellor," she said, and her voice cracked. "I am detecting a second human fleet arriving in the Talvine system. Arrival vector is behind the Zarathi formation. They are cutting off the Dominion's retreat." "How many ships?" asked Mars. She recalibrated her sensors. She ran the count again and again. 1,200, she said. 1,200 vessels. Heavy configuration. "These ships are significantly larger than the first fleet. I am reading mass signatures consistent with carrier-class vessels, dreadnought-class vessels, and several signatures I cannot classify because they are larger than anything in our database." The council chamber made no sound. For perhaps the first time in 11,000 years, 400 species were simultaneously and completely speechless. 1,200 ships. The first fleet of 147 had already inflicted devastating losses on the Zarathi. 1,200 ships of a larger, heavier class was not a reinforcement. It was an extinction-level event. The new fleet fanned out behind the Zarathi formation with mechanical precision. They moved differently from the first fleet. The first fleet had fought with aggression, with fury, with the desperate energy of soldiers who knew they were outnumbered and did not care. This second fleet moved with patience, with inevitability. They spread across the Zarathi's retreat vector like a net, and they waited. Captain Vasquez's voice came through the chamber speakers again, but this time she was not speaking to the Zarathi. She was speaking on an open channel, and her voice carried the unmistakable tone of someone who had been holding a secret and was deeply, profoundly satisfied to finally reveal it. "Zarathi Dominion Fleet. This is Captain Vasquez of the United Earth Federation. You are now surrounded. The fleet behind you is the 2nd Expeditionary Force under Admiral Kowalski. I strongly suggest you surrender. You will not receive a third warning." Empress Vreal did not surrender. The Zarathi did not understand surrender. Their biology did not include the concept. A Zarathi queen fought until she won, or until she died. There was no middle ground. The Empress reorganized her remaining fleet and split it into 2 groups. Half turned to face the new threat behind them. Half continued pressing the attack against Vasquez's battered First Fleet. It was a reasonable tactical decision. In fact, it was probably the only decision available, but it was based on the assumption that she was now dealing with the full extent of the human force. First Fleet in front, Second Fleet behind. Total human strength approximately 1,350 vessels, against her remaining 1,600. The numbers were closer to even now, but the Zarathi still had a numerical advantage, and their bioships could regenerate damage over time if given the opportunity. Admiral Kowalski's voice cut through the battle chatter. He sounded older than Vasquez. Calmer. The kind of calm that comes from having fought so many battles that war has become routine. All units weapons free, standard doctrine. No mercy for those who eat the innocent. The Second Fleet opened fire, and the Zarathi learned that the First Fleet's railguns were not the only weapon humanity had brought to the stars. The larger ships carried something different. Missile systems. Not the guided plasma missiles that Council forces used, which sought targets with sophisticated AI and detonated in calculated patterns designed to disable rather than destroy. Human missiles were simpler and more terrible. Each one carried a shaped nuclear warhead, a technology so old and so crude that most Council species had abandoned it before they achieved spaceflight. But the humans had not abandoned it. They had refined it. They had taken the basic concept of nuclear fission and fusion, and they had engineered warheads specifically designed for space combat. Shaped charges that focused the blast in a single direction. Warheads that detonated in sequence. The first blast stripping away armor, the second penetrating the hull, the third detonating inside the ship. Triple tap, the human crews called it. The first wave of missiles hit the Zarathari rear formation. 40 bioships vanished in nuclear fire. Not damaged, not disabled, vanished. Where there had been ships, there was now expanding clouds of superheated plasma and organic debris. Empress Viral felt her fleet dying. Each destroyed ship sent a pulse of chemical distress through the psychic network that connected all Zarathi. She could feel her children burning, her soldiers screaming, her ships being torn apart by weapons that should not exist, wielded by creatures that should not be here, from a world that should have been nothing more than a footnote in a forgotten survey. She pushed her forces forward, all of them. Every ship. Abandon the split formation. Concentrate everything on the first fleet, the weaker one. Break through, reach the planet, feed. If they could reach the planet, the biomass of 6 million Quathari would fuel a new generation of warriors, reinforcements born from consumption. It was the Zarathi way. It had always worked before. The full weight of the remaining Zarathi fleet crashed against Vasquez's line. It was overwhelming. Ships that had been fighting for nearly an hour, low on ammunition, scarred and broken, faced the full fury of over 1,000 bioships converging on their position. The destroyer Hammerfall was the first to fall in this final push. Captain Torres, who had already lost 2 repair crews, fought his dying ship with everything it had left. When the railguns ran dry, he used point defense systems. When those overheated, he rammed his ship into the nearest Zarathi vessel, detonating his remaining fuel reserves on impact. The explosion consumed both ships and 2 others nearby. The frigate Defiant followed. Then the cruiser Relentless. Then the destroyer Packrunner. Human ships died, one after another, their crews fighting to the last second, buying time with their lives. In the council chamber, Ambassador Cathari Liss was weeping. Not for the humans. She did not know the humans. She was weeping because someone was dying for her people, and she did not understand why. "Why are they doing this?" she whispered. "They do not know us. We have never spoken to them. We have nothing to offer them. Why are they dying for us?" Nobody had an answer. Captain Vasquez's ship, the Ardent Fury, took a direct hit from 3 acid streams simultaneously. The port side hull melted inward, killing 60 crew members in compartments that were suddenly open to vacuum. Fires erupted across 4 decks. The main reactor began to destabilize. Vasquez stood on her bridge, blood running down her face from a cut caused by flying debris, and she gave orders not to retreat, not to eject, orders to continue fighting. She directed her remaining weapons at the largest Zarathi vessel in range and fired everything she had left. And behind the Zarathi fleet, Admiral Kowalski's second fleet closed the trap. The larger, fresher ships advanced through the debris field of destroyed Zarathi vessels, their nuclear missiles and railguns firing in coordinated volleys that carved corridors of destruction through the Dominion's ranks. The Zarathi were being ground between 2 forces, a hammer and an anvil, and for the first time in recorded history, a Zarathi Empress faced the possibility of total defeat. The battle lasted another 90 minutes. When it was over, the Zarathi Dominion fleet had been reduced from 2,000 ships to less than 200. Empress Rao's flagship was crippled, drifting, its organic systems failing, its queen wounded. The surviving Zarathi ships clustered around their empress like dying cells around a damaged organ. The human fleet surrounded them. Vasquez's first fleet was devastated. Of 147 ships, 53 remained combat-capable. The rest were destroyed or so badly damaged that they were effectively dead, kept alive only by the stubbornness of crews who refused to abandon them. The second fleet was in better shape, having entered the battle later and with heavier ships, but even they showed the marks of fierce fighting. Captain Vasquez, still standing on the shattered bridge of the Ardent Fury, opened a channel to the Zarathi flagship, Empress Vral. "Your fleet is destroyed. Your expansion into this system is over. You will withdraw your surviving forces from this sector and you will not return. If you attempt to consume another inhabited world, we will find you. And next time, we will not leave survivors. Confirm your withdrawal." There was silence for a long moment, then, through the translators came a sound that no one in the council had ever heard from a Zarathi, a low, keening wail that the linguistic databases eventually classified as an expression of submission. Talveen 3 was saved. 6 million Quathari who had been sending farewell messages to their families looked up at a sky full of battered human warships and did not know whether to celebrate or to be terrified. On Aethonus Prime, Chancellor Mars stared at the holographic display showing the aftermath of the battle. Debris fields, cooling plasma, the wreckage of hundreds of ships, human and Zerathai alike. Contact them, he said quietly. Contact the humans. Invite them to the council. We need to speak with them. And say what? Asked Valoriden. The Chancellor looked at her. In his ancient eyes there was something that might have been fear, or might have been awe, or might have been the dawning realization that the galaxy had just changed in a way that could not be undone. We say thank you, he said. And then we ask them what they want. Because anyone who fights like that, who sacrifices like that for people they have never met, is either the most noble species in the galaxy or the most dangerous. And we need to find out which one before it is too late. The invitation was sent. And across the void of space from the bridge of a broken ship orbiting a world she had saved, Captain Elena Vasquez received it. She read it once. She smiled. It was not a warm smile. Then she forwarded the invitation to Earth with a note attached that read simply, "They want to talk. Recommend we send someone who is good at smiling." Earth's response came 12 hours later. Delegation en route. And Elena, good work out there. Come home soon. Vasquez leaned back in her chair, looked out at the stars through a cracked viewport, and closed her eyes. The first battle was over. But she knew, with the certainty of a soldier who understood the nature of the galaxy, that it was only the beginning. The human delegation arrived at Aethonus Prime 11 days after the Battle of Talvine. The Council had spent those 11 days in a state of controlled panic. Intelligence agencies from every major species worked around the clock to gather information about humanity. What they found was deeply unsettling. Earth was not a paradise world. It was not a carefully managed garden planet like Valoria, where the climate had been engineered for optimal comfort over 6,000 years. It was not a vast ocean world like Kefar, tranquil and deep. Earth was a violent, unpredictable, geologically active planet with extreme temperature variations, natural disasters that occurred with terrifying regularity, and an ecosystem built entirely around the principle that everything was trying to eat everything else. The humans had evolved on this world. They had survived ice ages that covered their planet in glaciers. They had survived volcanic eruptions that blacked out their skies for years. They had survived asteroid impacts, plagues, famines, floods, and every form of natural catastrophe that a hostile universe could throw at a species. And in the gaps between these disasters, when the planet was not actively trying to kill them, they had turned on each other. The intelligence reports catalogued human history, and the analysts who compiled them requested psychological support afterward. Thousands of wars, millions of battles, billions of casualties over their recorded history alone. They had invented weapons of mass destruction and then used them on their own kind. They had built empires that spanned continents and then burned those empires to the ground over disagreements about religion, resources, borders, and in at least one documented case, a sporting event. And yet, impossibly, they had also built. They had created art that their analysts found genuinely moving. Music that used mathematical structures so complex that Dravathi mathematicians spent days analyzing a single symphony. Literature that explored the full range of conscious experience with a depth that suggested humans felt everything more intensely than most species. Love, grief, joy, rage, hope, despair. They seemed to experience all of it at maximum volume all the time, and somehow they did not collapse under the weight of it.
They are insane,
concluded the Valorian intelligence assessment.
They are extraordinary,
concluded the Cathari assessment. They are terrifying, concluded the Dravathi assessment. All three were correct. The delegation ship arrived at docking port 17 on Aethonus Prime. It was a human vessel, naturally, and it looked exactly like every other human ship the Council had seen. Functional, armored, bristling with weapons even though it was supposed to be a diplomatic vessel. The humans, it seemed, did not distinguish between warships and everything else. All their ships were warships. Some just happened to also carry diplomats. The delegation was led by a woman named Ambassador Sarah Chen. She was in her late 50s, with grey streaks in her black hair and a face that carried the specific kind of calm that comes from having survived things that should have killed her. She had been a soldier before she became a diplomat. This was, the Council would later learn, common among human diplomats. The humans believed that the best negotiators were people who understood what happened when negotiation failed. Chen was accompanied by a small team. A military advisor, Colonel James Okafor, who stood behind her like a shadow and said almost nothing but watched everything with eyes that missed nothing. A scientific attaché named Dr. Priya Sharma, whose wide-eyed fascination with the council station was so genuine that several delegates found it charming despite their nervousness, and two Marines in full combat armor who stood at the chamber entrance and made everyone who walked past them deeply uncomfortable. The council chamber was full. Every species had sent representatives. Several had sent additional military observers. The gallery seats, normally empty, were packed. This was the most anticipated session in living memory. The species that had defeated the Zerathi Dominion in open combat with primitive weapons and impossible courage was about to speak. Chancellor Mars opened the session with the traditional words of welcome. He spoke of cooperation, of mutual respect, of the long and proud history of the Council in maintaining galactic peace. It was a good speech. He had spent 3 days writing it. Ambassador Chen listened politely, her hands folded in her lap, her expression pleasant and unreadable. When the Chancellor finished, he gestured to the central podium. The Council recognizes Ambassador Sarah Chen of the United Earth Federation. You may address the Assembly. She walked to the podium with measured steps. She looked out at the chamber, at 400 species watching her with every type of sensory organ the galaxy had devised, and she did something unexpected. She smiled. It was a real smile. Warm, genuine. The kind of smile that made you want to trust the person wearing it. Several delegates later admitted that the smile made them feel better about the situation. This was, of course, exactly what it was designed to do. Ambassador Chen had not survived 30 years of human politics without learning how to use a smile as a weapon. Thank you, Chancellor Mars, she said. And thank you to all the delegates present. I know our arrival has been unconventional. I know our introduction to the galactic community was not the kind of first contact anyone hoped for. We did not come with gifts or songs or scientific breakthroughs to share. We came with warships and violence. I want to address that directly, because I believe honesty is the foundation of any relationship worth having. The chamber was silent. 11 days ago, 147 ships of our frontier guard engaged a Zerathi Dominion fleet that was approaching an inhabited world with the intent to destroy all life on its surface. Our people fought. Many of them died. They did this for a species they had never met, on behalf of a civilization they had never spoken to, because they believed it was the right thing to do. She let that settle. Then she continued, I know this confuses many of you. Several of your intelligence agencies have been studying our history, and I am sure what you found was alarming. We are a violent species. We do not deny this. We have spent most of our history fighting each other. We have committed terrible acts against our own kind. We have used weapons on ourselves that we would hesitate to use on our worst enemies. This is true. All of it. She looked around the chamber. But here is what your intelligence reports may have missed. Every war we fought taught us something. Every atrocity we committed created a generation that swore it would never happen again. We are not violent because we enjoy destruction. We are violent because we evolved on a world that gave us no choice. And we have spent our entire civilized history trying to be better than our instincts. Sometimes we fail. Sometimes we failed catastrophically, but we never stopped trying. And somewhere along the way, in between the wars and the failures, we developed something that I think is rare in this galaxy. She leaned forward. We developed the belief that every thinking being has a right to exist. Not just our own kind, every thinking being. When Captain Vasquez saw 6 million people about to be consumed by an enemy they could not fight, she did not calculate the strategic value of the Cathari to Earth. She did not weigh the political benefits of intervention. She saw people who were going to die, and she put herself between them and death. That is what humans do. It is what we have always done, even when we were doing terrible things to each other. There has always been someone willing to stand in the gap. Ambassador Catherine Liss, who had been silent since the battle, spoke from her seat. Her voice was raw. Your Captain Vasquez, she saved my people. I want to understand why. Chen looked at her. Because she could. Because she was there. Because looking away was not something she was capable of doing. I know that sounds simple. It is simple. The most important things usually are. The chamber hummed with quiet conversation as translators worked and delegates processed Chen's words. Chancellor Maz waited for silence before speaking. Ambassador Chen, the Council is grateful for the actions of your military forces at Talvin. There is no question that millions of lives were saved. However, we must address the broader implications of your presence in galactic space. Your species has developed faster than light travel without Council assistance. You possess a military force of unknown size, and your weapons technology, while primitive in some respects, has proven devastatingly effective in combat. The Council must understand your intentions. Chen nodded. A fair question. Our intentions are straightforward. We want to join the galactic community. We want to trade, to learn, to share what we know. We want allies and friends, not subjects or enemies. We have spent our entire history alone on our little planet, and now that we know the galaxy is full of life, we want to be part of it. And your military? Asked Fleet Admiral Voren. His tone was carefully neutral, but his bioluminescent patterns were displaying threat assessment algorithms. Our military exists to protect our people and those who cannot protect themselves. We will not use it for conquest. We will not use it for intimidation. But we will not disband it either. The galaxy, as we have recently learned, is a dangerous place. The Zerathi is still out there. There may be other threats we have not yet encountered. Our military is our shield, and we will keep it. How large is your military? Voren asked directly. Chen paused. She looked at Colonel Okafor, who gave a barely perceptible nod. The United Earth Federation currently maintains a standing fleet of approximately 14,000 combat-capable vessels, she said. The chamber did not erupt this time. It went completely, utterly, absolutely still. The kind of stillness that precedes an earthquake. The kind of stillness that happens when every living being in a room simultaneously stops breathing. 14,000 ships. The Valorian Confederacy, the largest military power in the Council, maintained a fleet of 6,000. The Dravathi Empire had 4,000. The combined military strength of the entire Galactic Council, all 400 species together, totaled approximately 32,000 vessels. The humans, a species that had been spacefaring for less than 3 centuries, a species that had never been contacted by the Council, a species that had developed FTL travel on their own using methods that galactic physicists called theoretically insane, had a fleet that was nearly half the size of the entire Council's combined forces. 14,000, repeated Chancellor Maz. His voice was very quiet. Yes, said Chen. Although I should clarify something, to avoid any misunderstanding. She looked at the Chancellor with an expression of perfect diplomatic composure. The fleet that fought at Talvin, Captain Vasquez's Frontier Guard, and Admiral Kowalski's Second Expeditionary Force, those were not our primary military assets. The Frontier Guard is an exploration and patrol force. The Second Expeditionary Force was a rapid response unit. They were, in our military structure, what you might consider the initial wave. The first response. The units that are always out there, always watching, always ready to respond to a threat while the main fleet mobilizes. She paused, and in that pause, the temperature of the room seemed to drop by several degrees. What you saw at Talvin was not the United Earth Federation going to war. It was the United Earth Federation responding to an emergency with the forces that happened to be nearby. If we had gone to war, if the full fleet had been mobilized and deployed, the battle would not have lasted 90 minutes. It would have lasted 9. The silence that followed was so profound that delegates later said they could hear their own blood moving through their bodies. Fleet Admiral Voren's bioluminescent skin went completely dark. In Morpheki body language, this was the equivalent of a human going white as a sheet. That was only the initial wave, he said softly, repeating Chen's words as if trying to make them real in his mind. Yes, said Chen. And I tell you this not as a threat. I tell you this because I promised you honesty. And I will not stand before this council and pretend that we are less than what we are. We are a powerful species. We have a large military. These are facts. But the relevant fact, the one I hope you will focus on, is what we chose to do with that power when we first encountered another civilization in crisis. We chose to help. We chose to bleed and die for strangers. That is who we are. The session recessed for 6 hours. During that time, emergency meetings were held by every major faction in the Council. The Valorian Security Council convened aboard their flagship in orbit. the Dravathi intelligence services began running war simulations. The Mortheki Military Advisory Board calculated fleet strength projections for the next 50 years. The Kethari delegation did something different. Ambassador Liss contacted Talveen III directly. She spoke with the planetary governor, who confirmed that human medical ships had arrived in orbit and were providing assistance to Kethari civilians who had been injured during the panic of the evacuation attempts. Human doctors were treating alien patients they had never seen before, improvising medical procedures based on biological scans, learning Kethari physiology in real time, and saving lives through sheer determination and creativity. One human medic, a young woman named Corporal Rodriguez, had performed emergency surgery on a Kethari child whose respiratory membrane had collapsed during a stampede. She had never seen a Kethari before that day. She did not speak the language. She had looked at a biological scan, identified the problem, and figured out a solution using surgical tools designed for human anatomy. The child survived. When Ambassador Liss heard this, she closed her 4 eyes and made a decision. When the session reconvened, the chamber was even more tense than before. Delegates had spent 6 hours processing the implications of a species with 14,000 warships and the willingness to use them. Fear was the dominant emotion. Fear dressed up as caution, as prudence, as strategic thinking, but fear all the same. Chancellor Maz called the session to order. Before he could speak, Ambassador Liss stood. "The Kethari delegation requests the floor," she said. The Chancellor, surprised, granted it. Liss walked to the central podium. She was not a physically imposing being, small by most species standards. 4 eyes, 4 arms, a voice that was soft even when amplified. But she stood before 400 species, and she spoke with a clarity that cut through the fear like a blade through fog. "I have listened to the discussions during the recess," she said. "I know what many of you are thinking. You are afraid. A new species with a massive military has appeared without warning. They fight with a ferocity that our forces cannot match. They have weapons we did not think anyone still used. And they are offering friendship." She paused. "Many of you believe this is a trick, that the humans are presenting a friendly face while hiding aggressive intentions, that they saved Talveen as a calculated move to gain influence, that their ambassador's words about protecting the innocent are propaganda designed to infiltrate our institutions." She looked around the chamber. "You are wrong, and I will tell you how I know you are wrong. Right now, in orbit around my homeworld, human doctors are saving Kethari lives, not military personnel, not intelligence agents, doctors. A young human woman cut open a Kethari child's chest and repaired a respiratory membrane she had never seen before because the child was dying and she refused to let that happen. No one ordered her to do it. No one was watching. No propaganda cameras were recording. She did it because a child was dying and she knew how to help." Liss's voice hardened. "For 3 years, the Zarathi have been consuming worlds. For 3 years, this council has responded with words. Sanctions. Formal condemnations. For 3 years, people have died while we debated procedure. And when the Zarathi came for my people, when 6 million Kethari were hours from death, what did this council do?" It argued. It calculated fleet distances. It classified my world as a secondary system. The chamber was very quiet. The humans did not argue. They did not calculate. They did not classify. They saw people in danger and they fought. They bled. They died. 94 human ships were destroyed at Talveen. Thousands of human lives were lost. For us. For people they had never met. She straightened to her full, modest height. "The Kethari delegation formally moves to offer the United Earth Federation full membership in the Galactic Council, with all rights, privileges, and protections therein. And I will say this plainly, so there is no misunderstanding. If this council votes against membership, if you choose to treat these people as a threat rather than as allies, the Kethari will withdraw from the council and establish independent diplomatic relations with Earth. We will not remain part of an institution that turns its back on those who saved us." The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted, clicked, hummed, and flashed in their various languages of protest and alarm. Chancellor Mars called for order repeatedly before the noise subsided. Ambassador Chen watched from her seat. Her expression had not changed. The warm, pleasant smile was still in place. But Colonel Okafor, standing behind her, allowed himself the smallest nod of respect toward Ambassador Liz. The debate that followed lasted 14 hours. It was the longest continuous session in the Council's modern history. Species argued for and against. Military advisors presented threat assessments. Economists projected trade implications. Philosophers argued about the nature of violence and whether a species that fought as well as the humans could ever truly be trusted. In the end, it came down to a simple truth that Ambassador Chen had articulated at the very beginning. The galaxy was a dangerous place. The Zarathi was still out there, weakened but not destroyed. And now there was a new player in the galaxy, a species with 14,000 warships and the proven willingness to use them in defense of others. The Council could either have that species inside the tent, bound by Council law and mutual obligation, or outside the tent, unbound and unpredictable. The vote was not unanimous. It was not even close to unanimous, but it passed. The United Earth Federation was granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council. The vote was 247 in favor, 138 against, and 15 abstentions. When the result was announced, Ambassador Chen stood. She looked around the chamber at 400 species who had just agreed, some willingly and some reluctantly, to share their galaxy with humanity. "Thank you," she said. "You will not regret this. I know many of you are still afraid of us. I understand.
Our history gives you reason to be cautious.
But I want to leave you with one thought." She looked at Ambassador Liz, who met her gaze with all four eyes. "Every species in this galaxy has a story about how they first proved their worth. The Valorians sang. The Dravathi solved equations. The Kethari shared science. Today, humanity proved its worth the only way it knows how. Not with words or gifts or demonstrations of intellect. We proved it by fighting and dying for people we had never met because they needed help and we were there. That is who we are. That is who we will always be. The ones who show up. The ones who fight. The ones who stand between the darkness and the innocent and say, 'Not today. Thank you for letting us stand with you.'" She sat down. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Ambassador Liz began to clap. It was a human gesture she had learned from the medical teams on Talveen 3, and the sound of it, strange and rhythmic in a chamber designed for alien acoustics, carried a weight that no translator could capture. One by one, other delegates joined in. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. The Kethari delegation. Several Valorian representatives, a handful of smaller species who had spent centuries afraid of the Zarathi and who now saw, for the first time, the possibility of safety. It was not a standing ovation. It was not universal acceptance. It was the beginning of something fragile and uncertain and full of potential, which is the only way anything worth having ever begins. Captain Elena Vasquez received the news aboard the Ardent Fury, which was being towed back to Earth by a fleet tender, because its engines were too damaged to make the journey under its own power. She read the message, closed her eyes, and thought about the 94 ships that would never come home, the thousands of names that would be carved into a memorial somewhere, the families who would receive folded flags and words about sacrifice and honor that could never fill the empty chairs at their dinner tables. She opened her eyes and looked out through the cracked viewport at the stars. They were the same stars that every species in the galaxy saw when they looked up. The same ancient light, the same cold, beautiful, indifferent universe. But it was a little less indifferent now, a little less cold, because somewhere out there, in a chamber carved from an asteroid, 400 species were learning that humanity had arrived. Not with songs, not with equations, not with gifts, with a promise. We are here, and we will fight for you. It was not the introduction anyone had expected, but it was the one the galaxy needed. And far away on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star, 7 billion humans went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their species had just become the most talked about, most feared, most debated, and most grudgingly admired civilization in galactic history. The initial wave had done its job. Now the real work would begin.